So this is the second video that I've had to split apart into two pieces and republish with generic tags. There's only been a couple of these videos where I've made long ones, so this won't happen often, but I just happened to have a couple of them in a row that were really big videos. And I don't know if it's the size or the content. I know in one case it was definitely the tags and the label, but I'm splitting it apart and I'm putting shorter, simpler, more generic tags on it. It should fix the problem, so bear with me. In the meantime, I'm hearing people don't want to listen to 20 and 30 minute long videos anyway, so hey, it all works out. Appreciate your patience. Hey everyone, you got Marcel back again. Bear with me if I seem a bit dreary or grumpy in my videos. I'm trying to cut my caffeine addiction. I'm on day 2, so it kind of sucks. But hey, supposedly it only lasts 9 days. That could be a lot worse compared to other addictions, so we'll see how it goes. As for the topic of the day, I want to discuss where the apple fell. And for those who don't already know, that's a reference to a quote or a phrase that, the apple never falls far from the tree, typically referring to someone's children and how much they resemble their parents. This may be an interesting video for anyone who is either interested in having kids or is ultimately goal-oriented around their children, considering at some point starting a family. I have to give a little backstory, though, to give context as to how I wound up in the situation that I'm going to describe. See, it all started with my ex-wife. Now, before she and I had ever gotten married, we dated for, I want to say at least a couple of years. Though this is when I was in my late teens, so it was a little while ago. Looking back on it through a clearer lens, I can recognize that the entire time she and I were dating, she had wanted to get pregnant, which comes down to her insistence on certain things like not using condoms and stuff, but I had been dating this woman for years, so it wasn't as big a deal to me and I was being stupid back then. Not to mention we had been living together. She had had some kind of birth control shot that supposedly lasted for years. I guess they don't do those anymore. I haven't done any research on them, but this is what she had told me. But the shot had expired and she simply hadn't become pregnant, so we just kind of went with that. Yes, I know I was an idiot. Well, one day she comes out of the bathroom with kind of a smirk on her face, and I'm like, hey, so-and-so, what's up? What's going on? And she looks at me behind these kind of cold green-blue eyes and says, your problems are gonna get a lot worse. Those were the first words out of her mouth verbatim upon finding out that she was pregnant. You see, my ex-wife was an odd one. She had very poor social skills. She couldn't interact with people well. When I first started dating her, I initially thought it was a form of shyness. It was almost cute, the way she presented it. But over the months and at some point years, I began to realize that it was actually a flaw in her. There was a lot of things that she would do intentionally to cause me as much discomfort as possible. An example would be simple decisions. She would intentionally not answer them or give me any straight answer at all for that matter, but would rather make me wonder and choose, and that choice would often always be wrong. Now, you would obviously call that a shit test. I didn't know it at the time, but the amount of effort she put into it to make sure that I was wrong was so extreme that her own sister called her out on it and was like, Jesus, just answer Marcel, stop screwing with him. So petty mind games was only the beginning. Over time, she gradually progressed into complaining about me to people openly, sometimes directly in front of me. At some point along the way, she became physical. Although none of it was directly towards me, it was in the form of breaking my things. Like she would damage or destroy my stuff, and would do it where she knew I would find it or discover it later on, especially if it was really valuable to me for some reason. But every time I would confront her or I'd say something to her about it, she would always have this kind of a cold, emotionless expression with a smirk when she would address me. And she'd get this kind of a raspy sound to her voice when she would speak to me. There's no way for me to replicate it, especially coming from a woman, but it sends chills up your spine. It's really creepy. But that image of her speaking to me that way with that cold look in her eyes, I don't think that I'll ever forget that. Now flash forward a few years and you've got a little older version of Marcel trying to help raise that family. Now, she had already had kids before she ever met me. Her eldest daughter, no relation to myself, was being torn back and forth emotionally due to a custody battle between my ex-wife and the child's father. I want to say she was, 10 or 11 years old at the time. Well, this had been going on for several years, off and on. Every time the dad would get up enough money saved, he would send another volley of court cases at my ex-wife, and they would spend a few months going back and forth until one of them, typically my ex, would budge, and he would get some more wiggle room with his daughter, where he'd get to see her more often or would have more control, pushing for joint custody, that sort of thing. Well, the whole while he was doing this, he was programming or teaching his daughter to regurgitate everything her mother said or that happened in her mother's house. And I know this because one day I'm, driving down the road with her, and I'm like, so how are things going? What you been up to? Just kind of a family day out with me and the kids. And she turns to me like a perfect little recorder, and it almost sounded robotic, and starts saying, well, today mom did this, and before that she did that, and then this person did this, and then I saw that be going like that, and she goes on and on for like 2 minutes, and I'm like, whoa, hey, stop. I'm asking how you are doing. I don't need to know all that stuff. How are you? And she goes, I'm doing good, thank you. Not to jump around in my story, but at that time frame, I was in the process of leaving my ex-wife. I wasn't living with them anymore, so I'm assuming just having a masculine father figure ask the question triggered that response with her. I asked her whether or not that she had been told to speak like that, and she hesitated only momentarily before saying, that her parents always ask those sort of questions, so she had only assumed. See, the way they had fought that battle back and forth was by poisoning the other parent in the child's eyes. And over time, she had learned that the best way to get in good graces with each parent was to tell them that the other parent was bad or wrong for something, and tell them everything that other parent had done. And that would allow her to get more attention and more affection from the current parent. Now, realize I'd never interacted much, if at all, with that other father, so there's nothing I could have done about that. Long story short, the battles between them ultimately wound up poisoning her mind. And she only started healing after he won custody. Yeah, the guy won for once. How about that? Looking back on it, I'm kind of proud of him in the winning part, not the programming part. Once she no longer had the influence of the mother, she started going back to normal. So the pull and tug back and forth was what was causing all the problems. I see her occasionally on Facebook on her father's profile. Yeah, on my personal Facebook, I'm actually friends now with the dad of the daughter of my ex-wife. So I guess the enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? He and I are cool now, at least as far as I can tell. I tried to warn my ex-wife of what was happening, but of course, I became the villain and I wasn't allowed to hang out with her daughter anymore. Go figure. Don't ever do them favors, guys. They won't appreciate them. The point was, with all of that, is the guy that she was battling against was probably making between two working parents $120,000, $140,000 a year between the both of them. And it still depleted a ton of his resources. It had to have been sheer luck that he won that battle, and the courts fought him every step of the way. But my ex-wife was completely dysfunctional when it came to certain things dealing with social interactions, especially in a very formal sense, like a courtroom. She couldn't cope very well. So, she was broken, and it still took him years before he finally convinced the courts to let him have the kid. Meanwhile, honestly, the child is the one that suffered the most because of all the tugging back and forth and lies and being taught to make up stories and stuff to get the favor of the other parent. She has become a perpetual liar, to where they had her in a room talking to professionals with one parent present, and they would swap them out, and she would completely change her story. Then if they asked her directly why the two stories didn't match, she would get really confused and scared and wouldn't know what to say. Everything she was doing was just to try and please the parents, and it was tearing her apart. But to go back on track, as far as my kids were concerned, I wound up having two. Seeing her eldest daughter go through all of that was the reason in my mind where I didn't want to fight for custody, because I guarantee I would have had to go through exactly the same thing living in the same county with the same judges. It was going to be a 4 to 6 year battle. And I don't make, or at least I didn't at the time, make $140,000 a year to go fighting that. And all for what? I knew for a fact that my ex-wife would have poisoned my children's minds. It would have happened, and it happened anyway. To get further in my story here, they were already poisoned regardless of the fight, so it didn't matter either way. My logic in the way I handled the divorce in itself was I was trying to work with my ex as much as possible, with the children being the priority, making sure they had a good future ahead of them and had as much support from either one of us. I'm not talking financially, but in all perspectives. As much support and comfort as possible from both of us. I made a genuine, wholehearted attempt to try and work with my ex-wife as a team from that perspective as much as I possibly could to see that the kids did okay. So how did that turn out for me? What was the outcome? Well, for one, my youngest child doesn't even recognize me as her father now. She has been reprogrammed to call me by my first name. If you ask her who her dad is, then she will automatically reply that it's the stepdad, the one that lives with my ex-wife now, her husband. And this is while I was visiting them regularly, doing everything that a quote-unquote good dad should do, and giving her all the emotional support in the world. Any attempts to explain that I was her father would put her into an emotional rage that I was trying to steal her dad, and basically came from them teaching her that me saying that I'm her dad is trying to take the other dad away from her. So they set a mental trap for me. And that's not even the worst part. This gets a lot deeper. The eldest daughter, the one that had been living with me the longest, they couldn't just reprogram her to pretend like I didn't exist, like I wasn't a real part of her life. But when you only have 2 days, 4 days a month with somebody, you can't really give them a positive influence. You can't help them much emotionally. To this day, I still don't know exactly what they did to that girl to cause her to become the way she is. But it all started when suddenly at school she realized that she could blow the whistle on her parents and get a ton of attention. Now, I realized this too back when I was telling my other video when I had the incident with my father. Well, this kid made up every story she could come up with. All of the most violent, horrible things you could think of, like getting thrown through a wall, for example, was one of the stories that she came up with to tell her teachers. And there was this huge investigation, and all these cops and CPS showed up, and there was this big uproar. And what was really odd about it was when I came to see them for visitation, I'd pick them up and they'd come out and hang out with me at my house. She comes walking out of her house and says, "Oh, by the way, Daddy, I'm gonna live with you now." Completely out of the blue. And that feels like an excellent note to end on for this video. The second part is available immediately right here. Don't forget to like, share, or subscribe if you enjoyed this first half. Down below I have links to all my other channels with the green check marks if you want to see something different, or these videos on a different platform. Until next time, I appreciate having you. This has been Marcel.